G'day guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we are here with the second episode of the review for the year. Of course, we are covering the AAMI Community Series games. It's a great indicator on what teams are going to be looking like going into opening round in round one. So let's not waste any more of your time. Let's get straight into the first game, Geelong v Essendon. So the final scores of this game was Essendon 104, Geelong 83. Now the Bombers did start the stronger of the two teams with 4 of the first 5 goals, but in the second term the Cats did bounce back and leading at half time by 3 points. It was a pretty close game throughout the third quarter and the early parts of the final term, but Essendon did finish stronger with the final 4 goals of the game as they went on to win by 21 points. Now, I won't be going over much of the games itself through the review of this episode, but we will be doing that as the season goes on. So let's look at the statistics from this game, which I think are most important to look at from the match sims. So on the goals point of view, multiple goal kickers for Geelong was Jeremy Cameron, Shannon Neal and Tyson Stengel, all with 2 goals. And for Essendon, Isaac Kako with the 4, Caddy with the 3, and then 2 goals to Perkins, Gresham, Martin and Durham. So of course the standout on the goals front has to be Isaac Kako. A brilliant outing from Isaac Kako. He'll be debuting an opening round, I would imagine. Now on CBAs, the top 4 Geelong was Sam De Koning with the 25, Jack Bowes 21, Atkins with the 19, Nevitt with the 17, Holmes with the 13, Stewart with the 10, and then Blitzards with the 8. So it does look like at this stage that Sam De Koning will be the main ruckman for the Cats going into this season. Now on Essendon, Elijah Sardis had the most with 26, Ben Hobbs with the 24, Draper with the 17, Bryan with the 16, Caldwell with the 13, Setterfield and Merritt with the 12. So they are giving some younger guys a bit of a go in the midfield for Essendon, Stardust and Hobbs in particular. Merritt didn't really go much through there. I don't think that will be happening in opening round. I think Merritt will be back in there where they need him most, but we'll have to wait and see. Now onto the AFL fantasy talk. The top 5 for each team. Myers with the 116, Cameron with the 103, Bowes with the 96, Holmes with the 78, and then Nevitt with the 74. Now on Essendon's side, we have Ben Hobbs with the 116, Harry Jones with the 115, Nick Martin with the 112, McGrath with the 104, and then Dylan Shield with the 102. Now for anyone considering Hobbs and Jones, I would be a little bit less excited just yet because Hobbs did score 47 in the last quarter and Jones did score 39. Keep your eyes on both of them guys, but don't be rushing to get them into your teams just yet. Now at this point of the review of the game, we would be giving the 3-2-1 votes. However, we're not going to be doing that for the preseason. So what I'm deciding to do is pick one player from each team to keep an eye on going into opening round in round 1. So with Essendon, 100% looking at Isaac Kako, brilliant performance from him. And Geelong, Sam De Koning, playing as the number 1 ruck, interested to see how he goes this year. Next up, we have the Tigers up against the Pies, and a result that no one really was surprised about. Collingwood smashed Richmond by 83 points, 132 to the Pies, 49 to the Tigers. Now, the game was set up by the Pies from the outset. They banged on 6 goals to 1 in the first term and never looked back. Now, the funny thing about this game was at 3-quarter time, despite the Tigers being down by 75 points, they only had 5 less scoring shots. So good goal kicking did prove a little bit of a difference, but there definitely wasn't the only thing splitting these two teams apart. Collingwood did look good, but it was a very easy win in the end. And I think the bottom line to come out of this game has to be the fact that Richmond are in for a very tough year. I know it's only a scratch match, but to be beaten so convincingly can't be a good sign for things to come. Now, looking at the multiple goal kickers, Richmond only had 1 in Bauer with the 2. Collingwood had 4 goals go to Bobby Hill, Brody Myercheck and Tim Membry, 2 goals to Elliott and McStay. Looking at the CBAs, Jacob Hopper, Taranto, Nankervis all had 23 each. McIntosh with the 16 and Jack Ross had 15. And out of the less experienced players for the Tigers, Jack Ross was probably the most impressive. And looking at Collingwood, still Sidebottom had the most CBAs to 24. Darcy Cameron with the 23, Nick Dacos 22, Harry Perryman 20, and then Scott Pendlebury with the 18. So Harry Perryman having 20 CBAs does seem that he's going to be locked into the midfield for the Pies this year. An interesting role I think that he's going to play for the Pies this year. Never really played much in the middle for the Giants, so see how much Perryman gets in there in 2025. Now looking at the AFL fantasy scores, top 5 for each team. For Richmond, Nankervis top score with the 114, Camden McIntosh with the 108, Jacob Hopper with the 100, Jack Ross with the 98, and then Jaden Short with the 88. On Collingwood, Lipinski with the 141, Nick Dacos with the 127, Josh Dacos with the 120, Perryman with the 99, and then Isaac Quaynor with the 92. Now the player to watch going into the opening game for both of these sides, for Richmond, concerned after this performance, it'd have to be Jack Ross. Has shown potential in the past, but I think this year can be a time for Jack Ross to jump into that midfield core for the Tigers being so inexperienced. And for Collingwood, it is Harry Perryman. Like I said, very interested to see how his role plays out in 2025 for his new club. So next up is Hawthorn up against the Bulldogs. And after a convincing start from the Dogs, they're able to hold on in the end and win by 11 points. Bulldogs 77, Hawthorn 66. Now there were a couple of injury concerns from this game. First of all, Marcus Bontempelli came off in the first term with a calf concern. The Dogs aren't really too afraid of this one, and he should be fine for round one. Along with Lathan Vandermeer, he came off with concussion in the second term and took no further part in the game. So hopefully he's okay for round one as well. Now to the game, the Bulldogs were the better of the two teams in the first half, dominating in territory, but just couldn't capitalise on the scoreboard. And in the third term, the Hawks started to fight their way back. They kicked 3 goals in a row to get within 2 points of the Dogs and kept their opponents to only 1 goal to for the quarter. And when Hawthorn took the lead early in the final term, it seemed that at that point they had the game won. But credit to the Dogs, they fought their way back in front midway through the last term and in the end ran out winners by 11 points. Now, I think Hawthorn did take their foot off the gas, considering they play in opening round while the Dogs don't play their first game until a week later. But still a good performance from the Western Bulldogs, and hopefully they can get a few players back heading into round one from injury. And Hawthorn, I don't really have too many concerns about them. I think they're going to be primed for a big year. Now, on the multiple goal kickers for each side, Hawthorn had McDonald and Watson both with 2. And for the Western Bulldogs, Lockie McNeil with the 4 goals, along with 3 goals to Aaron Norton and Sam Darcy. On the CBAs, top on Hawthorn was James Warple with the 16, Nash with the 15, Meek with the 13, Day with the 12, and then Newcomb with the 11. And on the Western Bulldogs, we have Riley Sanders and Tim English with the 20, Harms with 17, Liberatore with 16, and then Matt Kennedy with the 14. So a couple of different names there for the Dogs. It'll be interesting to see in round one with Bontempelli back how many players like Sanders and Harms get in the middle. And then on AFL Fantasy, James Warple top scored with the Hawks with the 116, James Sicily with the 108, D'Ambrosio with the 107, Carl Amon with the 91, and Josh Battle with the 87. And then for the Dogs, Liberatore with the 138, Davidson yet to play an AFL game with the 102, Tim English with the 98, Joel Frazier with the 96, and then Aaron Norton with the 93. So a couple of players to point out there, Joel Frazier and Davidson. Frazier played a little bit last year, but he looks like he's primed for a big season in 2025. And then Davidson looks set to debut. And he is the player that I'm going to keep an eye on in round one for the Dogs. Surely he debuts after this performance. 29 disposals, 4 marks, 2 tackles, and a goal. I would be shocked if Beveridge locks him out of the round one team. And for Hawthorn, Harry Morrison's the one I'm taking a look at here. A little bit of a name that hasn't been spoken about much from Hawthorn, but 27 touches, 5 tackles, had a pretty good game for their last game before opening round, so hopefully Morrison's in for a big year. After that, we get to the Brisbane v Adelaide game. And after Brisbane held the lead most of the night, it was the Crows who fought back late and won by 3 points. The Crows 97, Brisbane 94. One injury from this game, Brendan Starcevic had a solid head knock in the second term and was ruled out with concussion. And because the Lions play an opening round, he will miss the opening game, which is really unfortunate for Brisbane because they've got some dangerous small forwards, Geelong. But to the game itself, Brisbane started well, leading for the majority of the first term. But for the entire night, the Crows would not let the Lions break away. Every single time they threatened to, the Crows would find their way back into it. Scores were level at halftime, and after a goal-for-goal third term, it was set up for a good finish. Early in the final term, though, the Lions did break away to a 22-point lead, which was the biggest of the game at the time, and it seemed at that point that the game was done. But Adelaide finished this game like a house on fire, kicking the last 4 goals of the contest to snatch the win in the end. A great win from Adelaide. Hopefully they can use this win as momentum heading into the season. While with the Lions, I think they put the cue in the rack midway through that final term, so I think they'll be fine heading into opening round. Now looking at the multiple goal kickers, for Brisbane, all with 2 is Kai Lohmann, Eric Hipwood and Berry. And then for the Crows, 3 goals to Darcy Fogarty and 2 to the captain in Jordan Dawson. On the CBAs, Brisbane had Lockie Neal top with 28, Oscar McInerney with 23, Dunkley with the 19, Will Ashcroft with the 17, McCluggett with the 13, and then Levi Ashcroft with the 9. And then with the Crows, O'Brien with the 25, Rankin played in the midfield for the majority of the game with the 21, Matt Crouch with the 18, Dawson with the 16, Saligo and Peatling with the 13, and then Draper with the 12. And interestingly enough, Draper only played in the second half, so a lot of midfield time for the young draftee. And then for the AFL Fantasy top scorers, Lockie Neal with the 110, Zorko with the 102, Dunkley with the 91, Berry with the 85, Fletcher 79, and then Levi Ashcroft with the 78. And then on the Crows, Jordan Dawson, best player on the ground, 135, Rankin with the 92, Crouch with the 90, and Saligo and O'Brien with the 80. Now the players to watch going into their opening games, the Crows, I'm looking at Isaac Rankin. I know it may be an interesting call, but the fact he's playing a lot of midfield time here makes me think he's going to be in there for the majority of the year for the Crows. So maybe not as much forward for him. And then for the Lions, Levi Ashcroft, brilliant second practice game for him, was brilliant last week, brilliant in the game against the Crows. And now I think with a lot of injuries to some young guns like Jagger Smith, Sam Lawler, I think that rising star favourite has to go to Levi Ashcroft now. Friday evening, we had the Giants up against Carlton. And after some issues that Carlton have had over the off-season due to injuries and one during the game, they actually dominated throughout the whole afternoon against the Giants and won by 58 points. 66 to the Giants, 124 to Carlton. Now, there was an injury from this game for the Blues. It was Mitch McGovern. He pulled a hamstring in the second term and was ruled out at halftime. Now, the Blues are saying it's only precautionary, but I still doubt that he's going to be ready for round one. But to move to the game itself, Carlton dominated early and pretty much put the game to bed at quarter time. The margin hovered around 30 points for the second and third quarters, but the Blues kicked away in the final term and ran away by 58 points. So Carlton, it's a good win. I'm still a little bit concerned with the Blues considering they've had a lot of injuries over the off-season and Mitch McGovern as well. But I do think that's a good sign, and I think they'll be fine in round one against the Tigers. And the Giants, they haven't had a very good couple of games in their preseason. They lost to Sydney, now they've lost to Carlton. You can't take preseason results too seriously, but I still think they should have at least performed a little bit better against the Blues. Now, looking at the goals, multiple goal kickers for the Giants was Jesse Hogan with the 3 and then Darcy Jones with the 2. On Carlton, we had Brody Kemp with 3, Fantasia and Mackay with 2. On the CBAs, top for the Giants was James Leake with the 19, along with Lockie Keith, who was the ruck in that game. Callahan had 18, Toby Green had 13, Kelly and Grukowski had the 12. Then on Carlton, we had George Hewitt with the 24, Koning with the 20, who was a sole ruck in this game. Paddy Cripps with the 19, Lord with the 17, Chera with the 15, and then Lewis Young with the 11. And on the AFL Fantasy, top 5 for each team. Lockie Whitfield with the 97, Callahan 96, Ash with the 95, Brent Daniels 82, and then Callan Ward with the 80. And then on Carlton's point of view, Camperali with the 88, Hewitt with the 86, Haynes with the 83, Lord with the 81, and then Ollie Hollins with the 81 as well. But with the players to watch, GWS, with his performance in this pracky game, James Leake's the one I'm looking at. Played in the midfield for the Giants today. Was a high draft pick in 2023's draft. Didn't play last year, but looks set to play in opening round for the Giants. And I think he's going to do some great things for the Giants this year. And on Carlton, you had Camperali and Lord, who really did well for the Blues as youth players. But I'm looking at Tom de Koning. He is a sole ruck. He 100% has to play that in round one. He was taken off at three-quarter time, had 78 fantasy points to that point, and I think that he's ready to go to Koning, really setting himself up with his contract year to have maybe an All-Australian season. So hopefully Tom de Koning can stay on the field and have a really good season for the Blues. After that, we moved to the Gold Coast v Sydney, and despite the Swans lining up a very inexperienced side, they led all night and won by 21 points. 63 to the Suns, 84 to the Swans. Now, there was a lot of injuries in this game. First of all, on the Gold Coast point of view, Mac Andrew came off in the opening seconds of the game after getting a big hit in a marking contest from Taylor Adams and did not return. Now, he is going to be assessed throughout the week and is in some doubt for opening round. However, a lot of people are saying that it is a bit of a precautionary injury. Some thought maybe it was going to be some sort of concussion issue. However, that's not the case. It seems like it's something to do with his chest. Hopefully for Gold Coast fans, Mac Andrew is there for round one. And there were some players who were taken off precautionary according to the Gold Coast. This is David Swallow, Lockie Weller and Charlie Ballard. The Gold Coast have assured people that they were only taken off as a precaution and should be fine for next week, but we've heard a lot of the precautionary calls throughout this weekend, so a little bit of a concern around them guys. And of course, the massive injury on Sydney's point of view, which is Errol Goulden. He came off with an ankle concern, getting caught underneath Will Graham in a tackle in the first term, didn't return. A lot of people say this is a very serious injury to Errol Goulden. Now, this is on Saturday afternoon. Still no confirmed news about Errol Goulden's ankle just yet, but I'm thinking it's pretty serious, and most people are saying it's going to be months rather than weeks. So really sad news for Errol Goulden. It's probably the most serious injury he's had in his career so far. But moving to the game itself, Sydney started brilliantly with the first 4 goals of the game, but the Gold Coast worked their way back into it pretty quickly. But unfortunately for the Suns, they were never really close enough to get to the Swans until the last quarter. The Suns kicked the first 3 goals of the final term and got within 4 points. However, Sydney did kick away late and won by 21. Now, it's a brilliant performance from Sydney. They had a lot of players out, but they still did really well throughout the whole night and kept the Gold Coast at bay. And on the Gold Coast point of view, it's very disappointing. They had a near full strength lineup and still struggled to get in front of Sydney. So I'd have a few concerns if I was Dimmer Hardwick going into opening round, but looking at the multiple goal kickers for either side, Ben Ainsworth with the 2 along with Closey. And then on the Swans, Tom McCartan with the 4, Joel Amati with the 2. Seems to be setting up a very interesting tall forward lineup for the Swans heading into opening round. On the CBAs, the only players for the Gold Coast to get to double digits was Jared Witts with 20, Rao with 19, Anderson with 18, and then Humphrey with 12. So that seems like the trio midfield that they're going to be going with the Gold Coast in opening round, with Flanders a little bit of a concern if he's going to be there in opening round. And for the Swans, a couple of different names here. James Jordan and Rowbottom, both with 16. Laddams with the 14. Sheldrick with the 13, along with Justin McInerney. And on the AFL fantasy point of view, Noah Anderson top scored with the 119. Jeffrey with the 99. Noble with 95. Ainsworth with 89, along with Closey. And then on the Swans, Matt Roberts with 112. Jordan with 110. McInerney 100. Lloyd 97. And then Sheldrick with the 94. Now on the players to watch. For the Gold Coast, I think it has to be Bailey Humphrey. Didn't get a lot of fantasy points today, but 20 touches, 12 CBAs. Looks like he's going to be locked into that midfield for the opening couple of rounds for the Gold Coast. And on the Swans, I think it's Angus Sheldrick for me. Now, I think with Callum Mills out for the first month or so of the season, I think this kid's going to get a real run at it. Had a lot of injuries last year. In his first season in 2023, only played a couple of games, but showed a lot of great signs for Sydney. So keep your eyes out for Angus Sheldrick in opening round. I think he gets a game in opening round for the Swans. So the first game on Saturday brought St Kilda against Port Adelaide, and the Power, as soon as they dominated this first quarter, the game was done. Port Adelaide went on to win by 44 points, 93 to Port Adelaide, 49 to the Saints. Now, there were a lot of injuries from this game. The biggest one was Mitch Owens. He injured his shoulder in the second term, came off in a lot of discomfort. Now, it does seem that he's injured his AC joint in his shoulder. Unknown of how severe the injury is at this stage, but highly doubt he plays in round 1. Cooper Sharman has a hand issue, did come off in the third term and didn't return, so unsure about him. And Willie Rioli, he didn't play in the second half, but I think he'll be fine. They said it was some muscle awareness, so I think he'll be fine. But to the game itself, Port Adelaide got off to a blistering start, kicked the first 6 goals, and St Kilda seemed to have not left the change rooms until the second term. St Kilda only had 1 goal to their name, though, going into half-time, and not much improvement was shown from the Saints in the second half. Port Adelaide continued to dominate and end up winning by 44 points. So it was a good response from Port. They had a tough game against the Crows last week, and also went through some tough injury news with Butters throughout the week as well. So I honestly thought the Saints would actually go into this game winning it, but credit to the Power, they did really well. And on the Saints, a lot of injuries throughout the pre-season. I think they could struggle going into the early parts of the year. But looking at the multiple goal kickers for St Kilda, it was Boxall and Higgins with the 2 goals. And for Port Adelaide, 3 goals to Willie Rioli and 2 to Lukosius, Pau Pepper and Burn Jones. On the CBAs, St Kilda had McRae and Steele with the 20, Boyd with the 18, along with Hugo Garcia. That looks like St Kilda's trio midfield for round 1, unless Marshall is back. And for Port Adelaide, Connor Rosie with 19, Drew with 18, Wines with 17, 16 to Horn Francis, and 15 to Sweet. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, Jack McRae top scored with the 107. He's in for a brilliant year, now playing full mid for the Saints. Steele with the 81, Wilson with the 71, Hugo Garcia with the 67, along with Jack Higgins. And for Port Adelaide, domination across the board from them. Connor Rosie top scored 140. Finlayson playing in defence, 115. Horn Francis, 113. Evans, 108, along with Miles Bergman. Now, for the players to watch in this game, St Kilda, I'm going with Hugo Garcia. Looks like he's got a midfield role this year. Had a pretty decent game this week. Last week was a lot better against Carlton, so I think he's going to be in the midfield core for the Saints this year. And for Port Adelaide, maybe a bit of a surprise, but Logan Evans is the one I'm watching. Seems to have the role that Dan Houston had last year. Excited to see how he progresses throughout the 2025 season. Now, onto the other game. It was West Coast against North Melbourne, and despite North Melbourne's domination throughout the majority of the afternoon, it was the Eagles who pipped them at the post, won by 2 points. West Coast 71, North Melbourne 69. Now, finally, we didn't see any injuries in this game. Hopefully, there's not any news that comes a little bit later. But to the game itself, North Melbourne did pretty well in the first quarter, keeping West Coast to just 1 goal, but unfortunately couldn't capitalise on the scoreboard. And that's the story of North Melbourne's day. They had so many chances to win this one by a pretty significant margin. They had 24 scoring shots to West Coast 16. But West Coast kicked straight, and that's what won them the game in the end. They stayed close throughout the evening and eventually just jumped them at the final moment. So good on West Coast for staying with them all day. Won both their pracky games, so maybe West Coast are on a bit of a rise. North Melbourne, I think they'll have a couple of good wins this year, but I don't think there'll be any more than 6 or 7 if I'm being honest. Now looking on the multiple goal kickers, Jake Waterman kicked 4 and Liam Ryan kicked 2 for the Eagles. And for North Melbourne, the only multiple goal kicker was Paul Curtis. On the CBAs, Tim Kelly with the 20, Graham with the 17, Flynn with the 16, Duggan with the 15, and then Reed with the 13. Tom Powell, Tristan Cherry, and Will Phillips all had 19. Sheasel and LUD had 16. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, Tim Kelly top scored with the 106, Baker 83, Jaden Hunt with the 70, Hoff with the 68, and then Jake Waterman with the 65. And on North Melbourne's point of view, Tristan Cherry 133, Sheasel 125, Powell 117, Caleb Daniel even 100, and then Jack Darling with the 89. 1 goal 3, by the way, from Jack Darling, so if he kicked straighter, they would have won, but hopefully it does straighten up for North going into the season. And then finally, with the players to watch, for West Coast, I'm looking at Jack Hutchinson. Didn't have as good a game as he did last week, but he's been a lot of great talk about him over the preseason, so being a mid-season draftee, I think he's in for big things this year. And for North Melbourne, I think it has to be Tom Powell. Looks set for a massive year. Had a good start the 2024 season, then kind of tapered off a little bit. Looks to have built up some muscle, stayed quite lean though, quite fit. I think he's in for a massive year, Tom Powell. And finally, we get to Fremantle v Melbourne. And after Fremantle had a pretty disappointing performance against the Indigenous All-Stars a few weeks ago, with a very good win against the Demons, 109 Fremantle, 90 to Melbourne. Now, there was one injury concern from this game. It was Jacob Van Rooyen. He came off early with a lower back concern, tried to get back into the game in the later parts of the first quarter to the early parts of the second term, but unfortunately it was ruled out. Hopefully, it's not too concerning, playing a week later than the opening round teams, but still a little bit unfortunate for the Demons. But getting to the game itself, was a pretty tough contest early on with both teams struggling to convert. Fremantle finally kicked the first goal of the game over halfway through the quarter, and they were the team who broke away in the second term. Melbourne's conversion was shocking though, and at halftime they were 1 goal 9. Now the Demons threatened to come back in the second half, but Fremantle were able to keep them at bay, not letting them get too close, and in the end won by 19 points. So a good win from Fremantle, great response after the Indigenous All-Stars game. The Demons, their midfield core and Petrarca, Oliver and Viney looks very good. Hopefully they can play consistently throughout the season. Now moving to the goals in this game, multiple goal kickers for Fremantle was Michael Walters with the 3, and then 2 goals to Shea Bolton, Tracy, Jackson, O'Driscoll and Voss. And on Melbourne, nice to see Oliver kicking 3 goals and Turner with the 2. Looking at the CBAs, Brayshaw had 23 for the Dockers, Sarong and Reedy with the 16, Jackson and Johnson with the 14. And for Melbourne, it was Max Gawn with a 28, Viney with a 21, 17 to Petrarca and Langdon, and 15 to Oliver. And finally, looking at the AFL fantasy points, the top scorer in AFL fantasy front for Fremantle was Jordan Clark with the 108, Wagner with the 103, Ryan with the 90, Sarong and Johnson with the 88. And then for the Demons, Stephen May with the 124, Petrarca with the 120, Gawn with the 117, Oliver with the 112, and Ed Langdon with the 108. So finally, let's take a look at the players to watch from this game. For Fremantle, I'm looking at Nathan O'Driscoll. Now, he didn't actually play the first quarter and a half, but when he came on, he became a real pillar of the midfield for the Dockers. Surely plays round 1, scored over 80 fantasy points in 2.5 quarters, had 12 or 13 CBAs, so I think he's definitely a lock for the Dockers in round 1. And for Melbourne, I know we could pick a couple of younger players, but I'm looking at Clayton Oliver. He obviously had a really down last 12 or 18 months. He looks to have returned to his best. Hopefully he can have a great year for Demons fans. And finally, guys, we'll quickly recap the players to watch going into round 1 opening round. So the Crows, we have Isaac Rankin, Brisbane Levi Ashcroft, Carlton Tom de Koning, Collingwood Harry Perryman, Essendon Isaac Kako, Fremantle Nathan O'Driscoll, Gold Coast Bailey Humphrey, Geelong Sam de Koning, GWS James Leake, Hawthorn Harry Morrison, Melbourne Clayton Oliver, North Melbourne Tom Powell, Port Adelaide Logan Evans, Richmond Jack Ross, St Kilda Hugo Garcia, Sydney Angus Sheldrick, West Coast Jack Hutchinson, and Western Bulldogs Sam Davidson. But guys, thank you for watching this episode of the review. Make sure to like and subscribe if you are watching on YouTube, and if you're listening on Spotify, make sure to leave us 5 stars and make sure to follow so you're notified on the podcast and the review every single week. But again, guys, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, we'll catch you all next week.